Booker Prize 2023. I've read the Longlist, so let's talk about that. I'll be reviewing all the books, then discussing what might make the shortlist and be the eventual winner. But I want to start with some general thoughts. I like this year's Longlist more than last year's, but I do feel like it had a lack of identity. It was a little bit disjointed, kind of like all the judges picked their favourite books and there wasn't a cohesive theme. To foreshadow what's to come, I think this really explains my personal experience, lots of highs and lots of lows. If I had followed my instincts as to which books were for me and which were for other readers, I would have enjoyed the Longlist considerably more, but then again, I really do like the drama of it all. The judges read 163 books over 7 months, and that's fast. It does seem just a little bit too fast for me, and I wonder if giving the judges a little bit longer would not only make it a bit easier on them, but it would also give publishers a little bit longer to get books out to the public. The long listing of a book before it is even published is something I hate, and I understand that it is especially bad for North Americans this year. A book prize is about promoting literature. It's just not the most effective things to do if your audience can't then purchase the literature that you're promoting. Before I start to talk about the books, fair warning, there are books I didn't like, and I'm not going to tippy-toe around that. I just don't do that. If you loved a book that I didn't, I am really happy that you got something out of a book that I didn't enjoy. The 13 books were loved enough by the publishers to be nominated for the Booker Prize and loved enough by the judges to be longlisted. That all said, let's start with a book I did enjoy, A Spell of Good Things, bámi, Adébáyọ. An ironic title if ever there was one. Adébáyọ's novel is about many things, none of them could be described as good. Set in modern day Nigeria, this book follows two characters. Eniola, a teenage boy who is getting beaten at school because his family cannot afford to pay the fees when his father loses his job and spirals into depression. It falls to Eniola's mother to solve the family money crisis. Not only are the school fees unpaid, but so too is the rent, and there is the lack of food situation too. She resorts to things such as sending Eniola and his sister out begging. Eniola's future looks hopeless. Without money, he is unlikely to get the opportunities he needs to succeed later in life. Wariola is the perfect child of a wealthy family. She is about to get married. Her future father-in-law is looking at his political career and wants to get Wariola's father on side. However, Wariola's father is loyal to his political rival and has built a successful business with the help of his government contacts. One thing I absolutely love about Nigerian literature is the open discussion of government bribery and corruption. It has a societal self-awareness that is rarely present in Western literature. Even if this isn't a central theme of this novel, it is still present because of the setting. Wariola is getting married and she's about to learn what is expected of women in her country and how any deviation from that is punished. This setup allows bámi to explore the hierarchy of Nigerian society and the consequences of violence and desperation. What is similar between Eniola and Wariola, and what is different? A poor young man and a wealthy young woman. Class and feminism. Two of my favourite themes are just central to this brutal and emotional novel. I would like to have seen these stories link up a little bit more. Both characters play very important roles in the other's story. These roles don't really require the big backstories that these characters got. Thematically, it is important to have both characters, but with regards to the plot, this could have been two different books that had a little bit of crossover if you so wish to see it. And it means it takes a little bit of time to set things up before this book really explodes. Lovers of plot will need to be patient with this book. However, lovers of good characters will have something to keep them interested in this book until the climax of the novel. If you enjoyed this book, I would definitely say check out Stay With Me, Adébáyọ's first novel, and I really recommend this book for fans of An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obiama and An Ordinary Wonder by Buki Papillion. Old God's Time, Sebastian Barry. Tom Kettle is a retired cop. One day, two detectives knock on his door and ask him about an old case. This sets up a reflective narrative of grief and loss, love, family and memory. But just as you're settling in for what promises to be a slow-paced character portrait that slowly reveals something to you, Barry floors the pacing, just about concussing his readers with the shock of the whiplash. Barry couples together a noir detective story and an exploration of institutionalized sexual abuse, an old man grappling with his use in life, questions around memories, a dubiously reliable narrator, and all of this feels like making soup out of whatever you've got in the cupboard. You know you shouldn't throw those tin peaches in, but Sebastian Barry didn't. It's ambitious, but it just doesn't work. The pacing is all over the place in this novel. As a result, the characters, including Tom, completely fall apart. And that is a real problem for a character-led novel. And it means the emotional hit of the sexual assault that he is exploring, it's just not there. The descriptions become clinical. This book has the potential to be excellent, but it is nothing more than a boring police procedural with ideas above its station. This book is orange juice and cream, curdled. There are similarities between this book and The Remains of the Day or A Sense of an Ending, but Ishiguro and Barnes are just better writers. I also kind of think there's a crossover with books like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but again, I think Stieg Larsson is a significantly better writer. But if you disagreed with me and you loved this book, I really recommend you read Carla by Colin Walsh, which is a significantly better book as well. Study for Obedience, Sarah Bernstein. A woman moves in with her brother after his divorce. She works as a housekeeper for her brother, drawing his baths and dressing him. Bernstein is able to imply a creepy sexual nature to their relationship, but this book isn't sexual. It is a comparative metaphor about the outsider in a new society and the skepticism they're treated with and the role that women play in domestic relationships. Let me tell you a story about Zadie Smith, and I promise it's relevant. After seeing the screen adaptation of White Teeth, Smith commented on the changes made to the script. A cut has been made and a motivation added. It adds clarity. For TV, you cannot cover up fat, messy characters with nice writing. Had I made those changes to the novel, it would have been stronger. I cannot help but think Bernstein is covering a lack of concept, characters and plot with nicely palatable writing. To Bernstein's credit, I don't think the judges noticed. I don't think that beautiful writing is automatically good writing. The writing is undoubtedly beautiful, but what Bernstein is doing is like dark chocolate. It's delicious, but I only want a bite, not a 7-course banquet. Her sentences are almost without exception bloated, and they slowly shift subject, foreshadowing the initial topic of the next paragraph-sized sentence. It's actually really impressive that this book is so short considering the lengths of sentence. She must have had 4 in the entire book. And I have seen the writing called pretentious, and it certainly could have been simplified. I don't mind complex language if it provides extra detail or additional accuracy. However, there were several sentences I read and I was left asking myself if that was indeed what Bernstein meant. To quote my favourite Sarah Millican joke, there was a boy at school who used to use the thesaurus to make his sentences sound posher, until one day he changed the sentence, "We gathered piles of wood for the fire," to "We gathered hemorrhoids of wood for the fire." It was written with a really nice cadence, which made the large blocks of text just so much nicer to read. But once you understand the metaphor that Bernstein is making, there is very little added to it. Just to get a bit meta, I'm going to quote Bernstein as a way of summing up my experience of the novel. In truth, I took almost nothing from these daily readings, though I liked the sound of the author's pronouncements, and I could occasionally be persuaded to issue some or other of his most aphoristic statements at the dinner table. That quote wasn't the entire entire sentence, by the way. There is no real plot, although that is intentional. The characters were a bit transparent. The setting comes through really strongly and well, but this is a novel that is all about the prose. Read the first sentence, read the last sentence, read any sentence in the middle of this book you like. Bernstein doesn't deviate. She is consistent. She spends considerable time on each word in this book, and it's really written towards a certain taste, a real love it or hate it novel. I would say that this book is kind of like Rachel Cusk, but turned right up to 11. I also think that you might like this book if you enjoyed something like The Memory Police by Yoko Aguaga, but wanted completely different prose. I didn't like it, but it is definitely an acquired taste. If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. There has been a bit of controversy around this book being included as part of the Longlist. It has been marketed as short stories, which are not eligible for the Booker Prize. And I read this book before the Longlist was announced, and my response to the controversy was it a collection of short stories? Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other feels much more like a collection of short stories than If I Survive You, which just reads like an episodic novel. And in the Venn diagram of literature, this book is at the point that novels and short story collections intersect. It's both. And I think the controversy of this novel being longlisted probably will disappear for most people after they've read it. Trelawney is a Jamaican immigrant living in Miami, and this book is essentially showing us areas of his life, focusing on the dog-eat-dog nature of the financial world he lives in, on the racism he experiences, his family relationships, and the cultural difference between Jamaica and the USA. Escoffery is trying to do all of this through humour. I don't know if it's just a cultural difference in the comedy, but he's really not funny. This is particularly evident during the weird sex story, which had all the humour of a kid in the playground saying, haha, he said sex. And I found the humour really detracted from the story because it was overly weird, and humour often follows the formula real, unreal, or set up, punchline. Sally is so stupid, real, that when you ask her to spill the tea, real, she gave you third-degree burns, unreal. Sorry, Sally, but you're an idiot. Escoffery's humour is taking you into the unreal without delivering the laughs, and it takes away from the message of this book. This could have been a moving portrait of a Jamaican-American man struggling. This is basically a messy girl novel, except it's about a black man, and it lacks the humour of a messy girl novel. The weird sex story was an examination of the fetishization of black men while demonstrating the power dynamics of race and poverty. It has permission to be brilliant, but this is just the perfect example of a story getting caught up in the weird, getting caught up in the sex. Look at the power, look at while he's doing it. Don't try and make me laugh, try and make me empathize with him, and then try and make me laugh. Escoffery is almost funny, he is almost brilliant, and while not the worst book on the long list, it really counts as a big swing and a big miss. If you liked If I Survived You, or if you wanted to like If I Survived You, I really recommend Shut Up You're Pretty, which is another short story collection that is nicely collected up and exploring very similar themes, but this time about a Congolese Canadian woman who may or may not be gay. How to Build a Boat, Elaine Feeney. Jamie is entering high school in rural Ireland, so I guess he's about 12 and he's 6 foot tall, and it very much reads like Jamie is very autistic, but that is never stated. He is simply a very intelligent special needs student. He is obsessed with building a perpetual motion machine, which he knows is impossible, but he confesses to Owen that this will make him feel the same energy as Noel. Owen is what he calls his father, and Noel is what he calls his mother, who died in childbirth and he can only see in video recordings. Jamie is bullied by Boy 1, Boy 2 and Boy 3, although Boy 3 has stopped hanging out with those boys and Boy 9 is joining in. I think there's no better summary of this novel and of Jamie than by the fact that he calls his bullies by number, unsure why he should bother learning their names. It's so empowering. As too is the point where the boys start to say, "You're a Jamie. Do you know what a is? And Jamie replies, it's a bundle of sticks, or a derogatory term for homosexuals, but it's irrelevant as I don't find sexual preference insulting. Jamie has a feel-good way of shutting down the bullies. Tess is a special need teacher at the school who looks after Jamie, and Tague is the new woodwork teacher. Both Tess and Tague are recovering from big events in their past. Neither teacher fits into the ultra-conservative nature of the school, and when Tague asks why Jamie isn't allowed to join his woodwork class, the three embark on a project, building a boat. This is a novel about being the outcast, about community and outsiders. You can really see the similarities to the Bernstein novel here, and both novels have beautiful prose, but in very different ways. Feeney is simple, but even with that simplicity, she has such strong voices for all of her characters. The character creation is simply wonderful, so strong, so vivid, and if you're a young author struggling with characters and voice, read this novel. The plot of this novel, yeah, it's basic, but it's really satisfying. I think the best way to describe this book is it's a miserable feel-good novel. There are a lot of heavy themes in this novel, but it's also about healing and a coming-of-age story for Jamie. Tess and Tague also go through their own coming-of-age style story arcs. I will say that this did feel a little bit more like a woman's prize novel than a Booker novel, so if you prefer that prize to the Booker, I really recommend this book to you. I just have to mention, I particularly loved Feeney's Jordan Peterson joke, and I'd like to address just a little bit of bad press that this novel has had. I've seen a few people saying that it doesn't represent autistic people very well. Firstly, I want to treat that with the respect that it deserves and say fiddlesticks. Secondly, there are more neurodiverse conditions than just autism. Feeney never says that Jamie has autism. How can you say that Jamie reads as autistic well enough to know that he is autistic, only to say that he's badly autistic? Surely he could be any sort of neurodiverse child. And that really feeds into my last point. Even if Jamie is meant to be autistic, autism is a huge spectrum and it represents so many different behavior types. I just don't see how you could possibly criticize Jamie as a bad representation of it. I really fundamentally disagree with that criticism that is going around. This novel is absolutely wonderful, and I think there's little wonder that Douglas Stewart, Margaret Atwood, Claire Louise Bennett, Nisha Doolan and Nicole Flattery all have championed this book. I know this is a divisive one, but really I think it's a must-read novel. Brilliant. This Other Eden, Paul Harding, one that I picked up and DNF'd before the long list was announced. And I wouldn't say that this was the worst book on the long list, but it is definitely in the bottom one. I still can't get over the apples. This book begins with a man collecting apple seeds to grow apple trees from. And how many people are involved in the editing process of a book? How many people read the book before it's published? I find it so unbelievable that nobody told Harding that you need to graft apples to keep the variety. It's not an obscure fact. Yeah, it could be a sign of poor research, but surely somebody told him, and who doesn't listen to the flaws in their novel and fix it? An author who doesn't care about his story, but about the essay he wishes he was writing instead. An author who really needs this metaphor to work. There are also several other inaccuracies regarding Malaga Island, which is the inspiration for Apple Island from this novel. And this is a big red flag, because what this novel is a white man writing about racial intolerance from the point of view of a black man. And if you're writing a fictionalized account of an aspect of the lives of people that you're not a member of the community for, then you need to do that with humility, compassion, and respect. And you have to research it hard. Otherwise, it comes across as a privileged white man mansplaining racism and taking up space that he shouldn't. This is just an author looking to cash in on a topic he thinks wins prizes. It's a typical white fragility response, and all that might be completely unfair, but this book is boring with poorly formed characters, and the only thought it provokes is, why am I still reading this? You may enjoy this book if you're into sadomasochism and need to be punished. Pearl by Siân Hughes. This is a novel about Marianne, who is 8 when her mother mysteriously disappears. We don't know if she left, if she had an accident, if she killed herself. We just know that she's gone. Now an adult, Marianne remembers her mother through a poem they both loved. But here's the thing, Marianne's memory is clearly faulty. She has memories of her mother that include an event in her life, such as an illness she has, and when she works out her timelines, her mother wasn't there. She struggles to piece together what bits of her childhood memory are real and what has been distorted by time and trauma. This is not really a book about Marianne's mother or the poem that they both loved. Yes, we see fragments of both, but this is a book about Marianne, her father, and her younger brother, and the effects of losing somebody from their family unit. They leave their home and move to the city. They never call their new place home, because can it really be home without their mother? We follow Marianne from child through teenagehood and into adulthood. We see her acting out. We see her doing dumb things. We see her hurting. I really enjoyed this book a lot. It has themes of love, loss, grief, memory, permanence, home, single parenting, acting up, coming of age, letting go, and quite a lot more. It is also quite poetically written, but not verbose. The prose has a very simple beauty to it. But here is my problem with this book. This is the last book review for this video I wrote, and I kept asking myself, was this the book where she walked on glass? Was this the book with the teenage girls going to the pub? But it lacked that big level of impact to make it really remarkable and memorable. It has to go down as a good book, but a somewhat forgettable read. And I know that that sounds like a negative review. I will read Siân Hughes' next book without hesitation. This is a success. I recommend this book. If this was a run-of-the-mill reading catch-up, it would be a highlight. But this is the Booker Prize, and even the books that you don't like on the Booker Prize, they assault your senses. They make themselves remembered. Prophet Song, Paul Lynch. I've seen a lot of people say the writing of this book is beautiful. And yeah, some of Lynch's descriptions are very innovative, but I clearly value beautiful writing in a very different way to those reviewers. This is just massive blocks of text with dialogue inserted into the paragraph. There's no stopping point. You can't have a sip of water when you're reading this book. The frequent dialogue is shoved into blocks without line breaks. It's not like Rooney or Evaristo with the no quotation mark things. Every time there is a full stop within a conversation, you wonder if that is the end of the sentence and the same character is continuing, or if it represents a change of speaker. And the writing is not strong enough to make that clear. Consequently, this book drags. You spend a lot of time rereading conversations, working out who said what, which is a real problem because there's only so much time I can suspend my disbelief that Eilish can be so naive. As a reader, I feel really insulted by the author who chose to do this terrible formatting. This is rude and inconsiderate. Now, full disclosure, I have dyslexia. That is very rarely an issue for me, but there were days where I could not read this book. I felt intentionally gatekept from this novel. A really terrible mistake from the publishing house to put out something like this and to not release an audiobook or something like that, which is the only way you should bother to read this book. Even now, I can't see the scheduled release date for the audiobook. If you look at this compared to the Sarah Bernstein novel, both those books had these big blocks of texts, very similar formatting. And yes, I didn't enjoy the Bernstein novel, but I was present in it. I always understood what was happening, and when it comes to the ability to write a sentence or a paragraph, Bernstein is simply miles ahead of Lynch. Bernstein could have pulled this off. Lynch can't. This is a story of an increasingly authoritarian Irish government who locks up a trade unionist for basically made up reasons. And we're following Eilish, the wife of said unionist, as she struggles to navigate this world with her children. And what I like about this book is that Lynch is not describing a hypothetical world. He's saying, look, this is already happening. The treatment of people like Edward Snowden, of Julian Assange, or Chelsea Manning come to mind. Whistleblowers, for the most part, struggle to work within their industry again, and unless they gain some sort of employment in a union, they're often unemployed. We hear these stories of corrupt corruption in Russia and China and the Middle East, Africa and South America all the time. But when it comes to our own countries, it's corruption within the Labour Party or the Liberal Party, the Democrats or the Republicans, Labour or Tory, as if our country is not rife with corruption and suppression already, as if the current trend of anti-protest laws sweeping Western countries doesn't demonstrate a will to control the people from increasingly authoritarian governments claiming to be left or right. It doesn't matter. They're economic principles, not authoritarian or libertarian principles. That Eilish is trusting the justice system and the appeals process is a metaphor for the blind trust the majority of people have for that system, for the system in which they live, the justice system, the political system, the police, so on and so forth. And this is an incredibly important topic, and I hope it raises awareness, although it is frustrating to read this and hear Eilish be so naive. And I would have loved more emotion from Eilish. Look, I know anger is an emotion that only the privileged can afford, and that's another point that Lynch is making. However, I feel Eilish could have used some humanizing. Without the emotion, Eilish's choices become logic problems that she's just getting wrong. However, if you put Nell in jail and tell me to leave the country and look for a safe place, it would feel like I would be coldly giving up on them. I can imagine the turbulence that would create in me. Show me that. Because that is the doubt that you need to make Eilish wonder if she is jumping at shadows. I ended up DNFing this one. I found it completely unreadable on some days and an absolute chore on other days, and I was avoiding reading. That's a big no-no. I don't think I've ever been as relieved to DNF a book than this one. I have never made such slow progress in a novel, and that is down to the horrible and exclusionary writing format picked by the author. Trying to put that issue aside, I think this is a book with an excellent concept, but it was not matched by the execution. I have to acknowledge the love that this book is getting, and let's be realistic, this was never going to be a middle of the pile book for me or for really anybody. And I've really struggled to remove my bias from this. And I haven't mentioned the pacing of the book because of that, because it felt so slow. But I assume that's a reflection of the slog it was for me to get through this. If you have any neurodiversity, I really strongly recommend you consider waiting for the audiobook to come out. And if the author or the publisher are watching, never do this again. All the Little Bird Hearts, Viktoria Lloyd-Barlow. There is so much to like about this book. Set in the Lakes District in 1988, our protagonist Sunday has autism. She has days where she can only eat white food. And the autism really comes through strongly when there are conversations around Sunday. Dolly, Sunday's daughter, and Vida, her neighbour, are having a conversation rating her food for whiteness. And you have Sunday's view and you are intellectualizing the conversation. Are Vida and Dolly being mean or are they being playful? And this is the exact thought process of autism. And this makes Sunday a really excellent, unreliable narrator. Not because she's lying, she is completely trustworthy, but because she can only see what she sees. Vida and Rollo move in next door. They're charismatic, confident, and friendly. Rollo brings the best food and drink back from town, and they host Sunday and Dolly for regular dinner parties. Because Sunday is uncomfortable in these situations, but nonetheless adores Vida, it creates this sinister feel, particularly the friendship between Dolly and Vida, or Dolly and Rollo. Dolly stays there overnight and you wonder why. They're next door. Your mind goes in all directions and you start to wonder what's going on. You're only getting hints. Even when this book finishes, you're left wondering, what happened? Am I seeing things? The first thing I did upon finishing this was look up various reviews. You're left with this puzzle and with a theory, but with no explanation. You're wondering if this puzzle is imaginary, if you're analysing things that weren't there, which is so cool because that ambiguity is autism. You're overthinking what happened. The ambiguity is simply glorious because this book, for all of its puzzle, it isn't about Vita, it isn't about Rollo, and it isn't about Dolly. It's about Sunday. Her feelings for Dolly as her daughter goes through the coming of age section of her life, the moving out of home section of her life, the finishing high school and going off to university section. It is Sunday trying not to feel rejected as Dolly blossoms into a confident young woman, having to let go of the uncertainty and to trust that she knows best for herself, and the idea that you might never know exactly what's happening in her life anymore, which in turn becomes similar to autism. You can see what Viktoria Lloyd-Barlow is doing with this point of view. It's the layering, it's trying to get you to empathize through this experience. You need to accept that there are things that you will never know the answer to. Look, I'm not going to pretend that the ending of this book isn't also unsatisfying. As a reader, it is natural that you want everything explained, but I think that that is the right ending for the novel. Viktoria Lloyd-Barlow's character work is great. I have never moved between liking and hating characters so much and so quickly based on Sunday's understanding of what is going on around her, and based on just how easy it was to like Sunday. In addition to the obvious mother-daughter, autism, coming of age and friendship themes, there are also themes around loneliness, isolation, prejudice, succession, and money. I think this book is going to be compared to Eleanor Oliphant a lot. It does have a similar charm to it, but I don't think that they're very similar books. It is a very unique book, wholesome and nice, cozy read with something sinister underneath. I think it's so clever in how the point of view works. Not my absolute favourite on the list, but one that I am just so happy and glad to have read, and I'm really happy the Booker Prize pushed this book. I would never have heard of it otherwise, and it was such a unique and different book and such a joy to read. In Ascension by Martin MacInnes. I was very happy to see speculative fiction on the long list this year. I think sci-fi has so much potential to be thought-provoking, and I hate how it's often pushed into genre fiction. Talking about new technologies and what that means for humanity and how things are going to change and what that does to the human condition, that's literary fiction. And I just love to see more of these books encouraged. I know MacInnes said that he doesn't consider his book sci-fi, but rather where science intersects literature. But I just happen to think that that is an excellent definition for sci-fi. One of the things I look for when reading a good SFF book is world building. Science fiction and fantasy books require a lot of information to be communicated to the reader. Good world building is essential. Being infodumpy is a literary crime, and Martin MacInnes is lucky that I don't believe in jail, because otherwise he'd be facing a very large bookish lawsuit. I'm not going to mess around here. This is potentially the most boring book I have ever read. It's bloated. There is no character work. It has all the plot of a road trip movie, and I don't see any thought-provoking themes in this novel at all. Somebody said to me prior to me reading this that MacInnes's understanding of science was terrible, and I admire your perspicacity and stamina. Bad science is something that I absolutely can't stand, and the science is neither good nor well explained. But I was so disinterested, I couldn't bring myself to even hate that part of this book. All I could feel was the chronic pain of the numbness that was engulfing my brain. I honestly started fantasizing about beating my head against a brick wall while I was reading this book, which is the point I DNF, because that's a really unhealthy thought to have. If you found this book interesting, I recommend reading up on the Fermi paradox. I'm not being shady anymore. As somebody with a degree in physics, this is a topic that you might find really interesting, and there is a lot of non-fiction books out there on this. Enrico Fermi is famous for once saying, "Where is everybody? Consider all the endlessly possibly inhabitable planets in the universe. There should be intelligent life. That's just statistics. So why haven't we been visited yet?" This is where the talk around filters come in. Fermi is saying that there either isn't intelligent life and we need to consider why it hasn't evolved elsewhere, or that there is intelligent life and it hasn't been able to reach us, and we need to consider why that is. So if there are billions of stars out there are billions of possible worlds too. But we need a star to have planets. That's a filter. Those planets need to be in the habitable zone. That's a filter. They need to have life begin on them. That's a filter. That life needs to be more than single-celled. That's a filter. That multi-celled life must become self-aware. Filter. It must be able to leave the planet it's on. Filter. It must be capable of interstellar travel. Filter. There are other potential filters too, such as there is intelligent life, but it's just not interested in us. But we know we would be interested in intelligent life if we found it. So that's just a filter, not an obstacle. There's the Easter Island theory that civilizations destroy themselves before they make contact. That looks like the direction that we're going in. Is that a big filter that no alien civilization gets past? Or are there just infinitely many of these filters that account for the infinitely many possible worlds there are? I personally love the explanation that it's a combination of local filters to our area, which means that intelligent life is yet to explore near us. Going back to In Ascension, this type of book really only tends to be thought-provoking if you are unaware of the ideas within them, or if they can be somehow brought back to humanity in a way that you are yet to consider. To be completely honest, I am yet to find a book about physics that I enjoy, but I did find this one especially dull. Western Lane, Chetna, Maroo. 11-year-old Gopi's mother has recently died. This is something that has been taken particularly hard by her father. Every day he takes Gopi to a local sports centre, Western Lane, so that she can practice playing squash. Gopi also has 2 sisters, and it's especially hard to look after a household with 3 daughters, earn an income, and process grief and depression. Gopi's pa is such a passive character, and it's a really smart way to demonstrate the grief he is feeling, the disassociation he has, and also to keep him in that loving frame with his daughters. And it's something that maybe Gopi can't realize. This is a coming of age story that deals with grief and asks the question, what is family? This is a really good, simple, short book, but the problem is I want to stop my review here. There are things that I don't wish to say as they will spoil the reading experience, but there's not much going on in this book. Delicious, but really light on. I get a real Claire Keegan-esque vibe from this novel, but with a very different style of prose. I like this book. I like it a lot. I don't think you'll see many negative reviews for it, but the problem is it's a bit light, and I think people are going to be reading this book and thinking, In Memoriam, Demon Copperhead, Chain Gang All-Stars, The New Life, why this book? I'll tell you why. It's a different style. I'm not saying it was the right choice. I'm not saying it's the wrong choice, but it's a quick, beautiful, and sad palate cleanser. It would be the perfect book to pick up after a few bad books in a row. Safe and good for breaking a reading slump. There is also something quite shocking in this book that I personally haven't seen any other novel do before. Certainly not quite in the way it was done here. Again, I'm not going to say what it is because it's very spoilery, but readers looking for a bit of an emotional experience are going to get more out of this book than readers looking for something thought-provoking. For a few readers, this is just going to be a absolutely perfect book. The Bee Sting, Paul Murray. Do you know what? I think the mark of a really good, solid book is when every time you take a break from reading, you think, oh, I've misjudged this book. It just got that bit better. I started off thinking, oh, I'm not sure about this book. And by the end of it, I would be very happy to see this win the Booker Prize. A really well-balanced novel by a talented author. It's not the only book I would be happy if it won the prize. But in 5 years' time, I think if we look back and we see that this book has won, we're going to think, yes, that belongs. This is, quite honestly, a stronger book than the last 2 winners. Told from 4 point of views: daughter, son, mother, father. The point that I realized that I was going to love this book was after that first change in narrator. As you switch from Cass to PJ, you move from teenage girl who is about to leave school and begin university to a boy transitioning between boyhood and becoming a teenager. The change in voice is so dramatic, it's so vivid, and it makes it really obvious that Murray has a unique and individual point of view for all of his characters. None of the main characters in this book were truly good or truly bad. What was so good is, depending on the situation, you would change who you were supporting in the family dynamic, and that That was awesome. As the Irish economy crashes, Dickie's car business is going from bad to worse. Imelda, his wife, is increasingly annoyed with him, and for some reason he's hanging out with a man making a doomsday bunker in Dickie's backyard instead of saving his own business. PJ is feeling increasingly ignored and unloved. Bullied, he considers running away from home. Cass is just angry at Dickie all the time, and she's really trying to impress her friend. Cass wonders, Imelda has filled the house with photos of the family. She takes so much pride in her body and in her looks. Why are there no photos of her on her wedding day? Dickie provides the answer to her. She got stung by a bee and refused to take her veil off, a tale that requires some scratching. Here's the thing, I could describe this book for hours and I would struggle to do it justice. So I want to bring up East of Eden and John Steinbeck. Steinbeck called East of Eden a box in which he could put everything he knew about writing and the human condition. Murray is really a modern day Irish Steinbeck. I can imagine Murray deciding that he was going to write this book, and before he did that, he decided to read 20 or 30 books and to jot down the themes in those books and find a way to include every single one of them that he could think of. When you consider that the 4 members of this family have their own satellite characters and they're all different, it's not surprising that he could include so many themes. Actually, it makes you realize where other authors fall short. This book is a coming of age tale. It's a leaving home novel. It has a queer character, a questioning character. There's unwanted pregnancy, money issues, growing up poor, growing up rich, violence, football, drinking, addiction, grief, death, family expectations, conspiracy theories, corruption, jail, blackmail, violent abuse, non-violent abuse, the effects of trauma, education, stratification. Murray hasn't merely built characters and a plot, and a very, very good plot, by the way, but he's built a society, a community. The characters and the setting interact in such a compelling way. Murray has built Ireland. And boy, after you've read 650 pages and you're completely engrossed in this absolutely fantastic novel and you're falling completely in love with this book, that's how he decides to end it? The House of Doors. Tan Twang En. Another powerhouse novel. Tan Twang En layers his novel with a really simple trick. This is a novel about writing a novel. William Somerset Maugham wrote a short story about the Proudlock scandal, which he later turned into a play called The Letter. The story appeared in his collection, The Casuarina Tree. Somerset Maugham visits friends of his in Malaya. Feeling the financial stress from some bad investments, Maugham needs a hit, and he's about to get one from the wife of the man he's staying with. What's really interesting is the hatred that she has for Maugham. She views Maugham as a sexual competitor for her husband. And this is a reflection of a reoccurring theme in Maugham's work. The competition between gay men and straight women for men. The viewing of each other as rivals. Through the timeline of Maugham visiting and the story that he has been told, Tan Twang En paints a picture of Malaya that is sexist, racist, and homophobic, but all in unique and different ways. You witness the casual acceptance of gay men with gay clubs and escorts, but in a very much don't ask, don't tell, and we won't ruin your reputation and career by letting everybody know kind of way. However, it is the racism and sexism that are painted against each other, and as the novel climaxes with the Proudlock affair, you wonder, how is this going to be resolved? Other themes include colonialism, identity, money, and interference in foreign policy. This is just a fantastically crafted novel. That is all the books, and as you can see, a very up and down experience. One of the ways I judge if a book or longlist is a success is to look at the number of books that I wouldn't have read if they weren't longlisted. Paul Murray, Viktoria Lloyd-Barlow, Siân, Hughes, Chetna, Maroo, and Elaine, Feeney. These are all new to me authors who wrote books that I would have been unlikely to pick up, but whose novels I really enjoyed, and I will look for future books from them. On the other hand, Martin MacInnes, Paul Lynch, and Sebastian are authors who I tried for the first time too, and they failed me. But that's still a great ratio. Last year, all of my favourite books I had already read when the long list was announced. So this year is a real success for me. What are my thoughts on what might get shortlisted and what might potentially win? A lot of these books are love it or hate it novels, which I think makes it really difficult to predict. When it comes to the shortlist, we have to question, will the judges champion their favourite book, or will they go for a more cohesive approach? So let's start with what I would like to see. My ideal shortlist would include The Bee Sting, How to Build a Boat, and House of Doors, and then any three of A Spell of Good Things, Pearl, All the Little Bird Hearts, and Western Lane. Do I have a favourite book on the long list, one that I want to see win? Well, for the first time ever, I have read the same book twice in a year, and that is Elaine Feeney's wonderful novel, How to Build a Boat. I absolutely adored that novel, and it's going to be very close to my best read of the year. So that's the book I would like to see win, although I would be so happy to see The Bee Sting win too. That is a fabulous book. And I don't feel I need to limit myself to just one book. I can support 2 books. That's twice the chance of winning, twice the chance of being happy with the outcome. And that's what I'm doing. What do I think the judges will do? I do think that The Bee Sting and House of Doors will make the long list. They just tick a lot of boxes. Prophet Song has got some great reviews. I think that has to be one of the favourites at this stage, even if it didn't work for me. Then it gets really hard. There are a lot of love it or hate it novels, as I've already said. And you can really see that if 3 judges like them, well, that basically guarantees that they'll go through. The 3 most polarising books I can see on this long list are In Ascension, How to Build a Boat, and Study for Obedience. And I think that they could all potentially make it, but I think it's unlikely that all 3 will. Looking at the judges' preference, I would suggest out of those 3, Study for Obedience is the most likely one to progress. Now, I think that this long list requires some balancing, and I think A Spell of Good Things is something very different to the other books, and it's definitely high enough quality to be shortlisted. Looking at the books that I haven't mentioned yet, I don't expect The Other Eden, If I Survive You, or Western Lane to make it. That leaves Old God's Time, Pearl, and All the Lonely Bird Hearts. And I think the last book in that list is doing the most innovative and interesting things. It is going to generate the most conversation. So All the Lonely Bird Hearts will be my 6th book. What about the winner? I think it's going to be a straight shootout between Prophet Song and The Bee Sting. And for me, The Bee Sting, it feels like a Booker winner to me. I know I'm probably underestimating Prophet Song because it rubbed me the wrong way, but I don't really think it's too controversial to say The Bee Sting is the book to beat at this stage. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that. And I'd like to give a special shout out to all my new Patreons: Beth, Karen, Sherry, Ange, Dorita, Jocelyn, Margaret, Zen, Gretchen, and Jess. Thank you so much for your support. Let me know your thoughts on this up and down long list in the comments section. Bye bye.